First and foremost, thank you for listening to this part one of this two-part series that we're doing on the Jeju Massacre. Here at Me, You, and Jeju, we try, well, this being our second year doing this, but we try to highlight in April and March and May aspects of the Jeju Massacre because it is such an important part of Jeju's history. So that's what we're here to do for you today in this like special insert that we're going to be doing. That's going to be a part of our second part, which comes out about a week after this, which will be dealing with the apologies that the government has given to Jeju Island for this atrocity. Now, before we kind of get into the introduction or the primer about what the Jeju Massacre is, Alexis, when did you first hear about this? Because I don't think many people who come here actually know about what the massacre is before
Definitely
they get
not.
here.
Right. Honestly, Daryl, I don't quite remember, but I know it wasn't immediate. I know for sure it wasn't my first year. I don't even think it was my second year. I wasn't very clued into anything historic about Jeju. So I don't even remember what was the first time I heard about it, or if it was just like a newspaper article or the Jeju Weekly. I just remember suddenly being aware of it and how big of a deal it was, how truly awful and how much of an impact it had on the island. So it just sort of went from nothing to like, whoa, that's big.
That's a great way to put it, because I don't remember the first time I heard of it.
Yeah.
But after that, it's all I could really see everywhere for a while.
Yes, absolutely. And then I was really paying attention to the monuments, and then I made an effort to go on the dark tour, and made an effort to start reading books and articles about it. So, but it really was just like all of a sudden, just that's a big deal,
And partially part of that is because the government has been trying to push it a lot more since 2010, right? Like before then, there wasn't this tourism aspect, the dark tourism aspect to it, or trying to make the trails that they have everywhere.
And even the English versions of things, so that we could even learn if we wanted to learn about it. Things weren't even available, or what was available in English was really limited.
Right. Just an example of that, just by my house, I've taken my dog on this walk in Jungmoon all the time. And just the other day, I noticed there's a placard there, like a large metal, steel, green placard, which you can now find all over the place in various parts of the city. And it was just pointing out where a old historical landmark in relation to Sasam was. And I'd never seen it before. Like I just never noticed it before. So there's a lot more of in your face 4-3 iconography and images and things like that make people aware that weren't here before.
Right.
So,
but having said that, I mean, it is so, which is why we're doing this episode. It is so much information. When I did first start learning about it, I thought, I'm doing a good job educating myself, only to find out that it was just, you could study this as for our listeners. Daryl is quite knowledgeable about the subject, and I feel like I know a lot myself, but it's such a vast subject that it's hard to say that you're an expert, or hard to say that you know details, which is why we chose to do this primer, this little education episode.
Consider it like a little booklet or leaflet about 4-3 for your ears.
Exactly.
And that's a really interesting point, because it depends on what information you choose, right? What information you learn about it depicts what you actually know, like how you view the massacre, right? Like let's just get into this now and talk about one of the best ways to probably start talking about Sasam or the massacre is the fact that it doesn't have an official name. A lot of people do not know that it's still waiting to get a name, even though people call it Sasam, 4-3, April 3rd, which is
Jeju Massacre.
Yeah, Jeju Uprising, Jeju Revolt.
Jeju Uprising.
There's all these names, and the government has gone with Jeju Incident because it's trying to be as politically neutral as possible in English. And in Korean, Sagon, I think is the term, has a little more weight to it than it does in English.
Definitely.
Right?
It's two different things for sure in the two different languages,
And so depending on what information you get will kind of frame what political outlook you have on it, because it gets pulled and chewed upon that way. So, but the way that I like to talk about it has to do with, you have to go back to the liberation from Japan. And then that's kind of far back. But the reason why that is because Jeju was under a huge social economic overhaul after the liberation. So you had 60,000 Jeju residents essentially overnight come from Japan back to Jeju. But they didn't just come back as laborers or whatnot. A lot of them got educations over there. So they came back as highly educated, relatively. I mean, some of them probably went to university and stuff with that, but they came back with like high school degrees and so forth, came back to a place where there were no jobs in the middle of a famine and a cholera outbreak. So there was a lot of unrest.
See, now, that's interesting. See, like I said, our listener, I had no idea that the outbreak, I think that, I'm searching my memory banks right now. I don't remember that ever being talked about. So
yeah,
wow.
And I just mentioned that to show that it's not just
how much was going on,
at that time. And that's just from the local, the Jeju people who are coming back here. Right.
Yeah. And I think this is probably something our listeners, I'm probably going to say this a couple times during this podcast. You must remember that we are just trying to give a very simple version. As I mentioned before, even people that study this, it's a never ending process as documents become available, as more information comes available. So really just keep in mind that we are doing a Cliff Notes version for you, just a basic education.
And before I keep getting, and if we do make any mistakes or anything, please forgive us.
Yes, because we're not.
Our best.
It's a lot of information to maintain and to hold in one's head. But so agreed. So that's a good point to start with, which is just where the Jeju people were at the time.
And
mentally and
Before we get back to that, I should explain, the massacre was from 1947 to 54, technically. That's the whole time of it. And it resulted in the deaths of 30,000 island residents. At least 300 villages were burned to the ground. More than 40,000 homes were destroyed. And most of this was at the hands of the South Korean government. 80% of it is believed to be blamed on them, but 10, 20% on the rebels. So, but how did we get to this point of tumult and, taking Jeju into a tinderbox? One of it has to do with the fact that there was all these people who came to the island, no jobs, famine, all that kind of stuff. Another part was that there was a great disdain for Japan and Japanese collaborators due to Jeju's treatment underneath Japanese colonial rule. What people who live here now know is that Jeju was like a fortified base. It's a very important strategic place in Asia because of where it's positioned in the ocean.
The waters surrounding it, etc. Yes.
Yeah, close to China, close to Japan. And it was fortified as essentially a base by Japan. And when I said 60,000 troops, Jeju residents came here, 50,000 Japanese troops went back. Right? That's how many Japanese troops were on here. And they expected 100,000 people to be killed if a war was to happen on Jeju Island. So the Jeju people were used as forced labor to dig the tunnels that are now here. And
the caves,
so there's a lot of anger towards them. And then the third major piece has to do with the United States.
Touchy.
Yeah, very, very touchy. And we're going to try not to
get too political.
We're going to try to go down the middle of the road is, I think, what we're going to do here.
And and at some later date, we'll have another podcast going into other stuff. But it's a lot. And, you can educate yourself further. We'll be posting links and to newspaper articles and books and stuff. And one could always go to the Jeju 4-3 Peace Museum as well. But
perfect place to go. And spend a long time there. So
we're talking about now what you have led us into is the Japanese occupation is coming to an end.
Yep.
People have come back home, and where are we now, Daryl?
So we are after August of 1945. After that, so there's famine that's beginning during this period. There's cholera breakout. There's all these people here, but Jeju is seen as different than the mainland by the Americans, and they don't come here for 2 months.
Right.
So there's a power vacuum that is just no one's governing, but these groups called the People's Committees, they kind of take over the local governance here on Jeju. And that works well enough, right? And then when the Americans do come here, they collaborate together.
Yes.
You know, there's a great quote in the book that talks about, it's about an American named Meade. And he says that essentially the only government on Jeju is the People's Committee. And, you know, and it's kind of like a leftist leaning group. Well, not kind of, it is.
Educated.
Yeah. Well, that's why the education matters, right? The fact that they came back so educated. They started founding schools like crazy on the island. So
an important part of this as well, is that now we're dividing the people almost with this education and not educated, and the occupation and everything. So now it's quite a I'm losing my words here, but it's starting to cause quite a rift.
Yeah. And then, so you have these people's committees that are the government, and everything's working well, except for there's these like little inklings of corruption with the Americans.
Right.
Which is interesting because we actually know who, like we have it's a handful. It's like 47 or something like that. And we know who these people are. We know their names. And some of them, interesting in my research, some of them brought their families here. Right?
Yeah,
like
we're diving too far. It is very interesting, and we could have a whole let's
I'll skim over that. I'll keep going. And so
you guys, this is going to be such a hard episode to just like keep going. Yeah,
Americans here and corruption, and then in August of 1946, Jeju becomes its own province. Now, this sounds really bureaucratic because it is, but the problems with that is. The leftists on Jeju didn't really want it because it has to do with taxes. It has to do with then you have to bring a police force, its own police
separatists.
Force.
Yes, and you have to take care of yourself. And to this day, for listeners, some people might not even be aware of this. Jeju still is its own province, and for instance, at the beginning of the pandemic, we weren't a part of what was going on the mainland. The mainland was doing rules, and I was making posts on Facebook and the groups I run. I would always be quick to say this is happening on the mainland, but Jeju has yet to make their own set of rules. So we have our own lottery system. I mean, it really is its own province and its own entity.
And it's a big thing now, right?
It's a huge thing now. But at the beginning, there we go.
Yeah, and people were worried because it meant like it had to get their own food and supplies.
Absolutely. It's a big deal to cut oneself off like that. Yes.
And then instantly I believe it became the poorest province overnight, like just like that. Yeah. Right? Like there's no agriculture here, right?
No.
So, but what happens with that is then you need a government. And then so we have the People's
step up.
Committee.
Where are we going to put people? Yep.
Yeah. But the People's Committee are the government.
Yep.
But they got banned along with the South Korean Workers' Party of Korea, because that's kind of the umbrella they fell under. If that's the Communist Party, even though they weren't necessarily a communist organization like that.
And this is where it gets tricky as well, is because that still haunts the families to this day. Is this label that was given. So let's keep on going there.
Yeah, and so keep that in your mind, kind of, because it's important to remember the communist aspect about that kind of thing. So they got rid of the People's Committee and they started putting their own like rightist Japanese collaborators, people who were the police under Japan. They put them in power again, and they put on a democratic, like a right in charge of the country, on charge of the province, which the People's Committees did not like. They were very upset about it.
Of course.
Yeah. Because they were like there was assurances.
We thought we were moving on past this, right? So, and now it would seem like a huge backward step, really.
Yeah, back to another occupation in a way.
Right, exactly.
Sort
of. And we had just the island had just finished. So, so there we go.
And incidentally, the first, what is considered the first anti-American protest actually happened on Jeju by high school and middle school students in February of 1947. Amazing. Because, which I don't like it's not necessarily a huge protest, but it is important that it's first.
And it was an organized protest too. So it wasn't just like it was thought out and organized. So moving on, Daryl. So now we're in, what year are we now?
We're in February of 1947.
Okay.
So to recap, Jeju residents dislike Japanese collaborators. The island has high unemployment rate while it suffers a famine and cholera breakup. Jeju becomes a province, giving them a larger police presence, and the People's Committees, who have been leading the province, have been disbanded. On top of this, there's the rumblings of the divide of South Korea. So this is where the issue where we're talking about North Korea, communism becomes more and more in play.
Right.
On March 1st, 1947 is the official start of the massacre, because that is the beginning of the shooting incident.
Now we recognize that as, what is the name now?
The shooting incident. It's just called the shooting incident.
Okay,
Yeah, March 1st shooting
gotcha.
incident is what I believe, like, it's all I've ever seen it called that.
Okay,
but do you, we've talked about this. Do you remember much about it?
Yes. The organized protests at the palace.
Yeah, Gwendokjong Pavilion. Yeah.
Pavilion, sorry.
Yeah,
why do I think that's a palace? I don't know. Sometimes
kind of looks like
it does kind of.
Yeah.
So organizers were there peacefully protesting, and the cops came. The police officers came.
Yeah, well, there's the police station was in Gwendokjong Pavilion, like in the same area. Right? So 30,000 people came. March 1st is Korea's...
Isn't that crazy to think about that number, too? Yeah. Like, when you just think about a protest like that on this tiny island, because this island is small. When I think about numbers like that, I'm always just blown away. So 30,000 people are at the pavilion.
Especially since the island was like 300,000 people. That was like 1/10.
And we need to remember this is the year, and we also need to remember as not only was Korea behind the times, but we're not talking about information getting spread via, this wasn't easily achieved, this protest. So, yeah.
So 30,000 people are congregated there, and the protest is ostensibly about the dissolving of the People's Committee. It's not so much about go back to our episode with Brendan Ryder about that. He schooled me on it because I was just flippantly saying it had to do with the divide of Korea, but it's like we said, it's more complicated than that.
Yeah.
And during this congregation, this rally, a horse kicked a child, a 6-year-old kid.
A police horse.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Police with a police officer on top of
it. Yeah.
Mounted, kicked a child, and in anger because these policemen are also from the mainland. They're not Jeju.
They're not Jeju people, right?
And the island has been shipping in police in anticipation of this rally, which is technically illegal, but that's for a different time.
You can see how, listeners, you can hear how we're going to struggle through this, but here we go. Keep going.
Kick the child, and out of anger, people will start throwing rocks at the police officer and his horse, and the police officer goes back to the station where police officers armed with guns open fire, who are also not from the mainland, and who are also from the mainland, and they kill 6 people and injure 6 more. 2 more injured at a local hospital, but we talked about that earlier. And this is like, if Jeju was like a tinderbox, now it's starting to smolder and become a fire.
Absolutely. This was the, how did you say this to me once? This was literally the beginning of it.
Yeah, this was the spark that lit the fire.
Now we're just going downhill, and fairly quickly, because March is a busy, and I don't mean that in a funny way. March is a busy month in Jeju of a lot of things are happening here, which we will be posting more information on our Instagram about how March plays out. So keep an eye for that.
Yeah. And then the next big thing. So after this incident, the people of Jeju are they congregate, they start organizing, and they come up with 5 demands from the police, or they're going to go on a general strike. The demands include executing police officers, getting rid of Japanese collaborators from police ranks, so forth. Yeah. And so they don't do this. On January 10, they go on strike. And this strike starts off pretty big, but it keeps growing and growing and growing.
With more people from different villages coming and taking part.
Yeah. And we talked earlier about the education and the building of the schools, right?
Yes.
Well, a lot of the people involved with this are teachers.
Which is a big deal. Make a note of that, listeners, because they also get the title, of communism and socialist, and yeah.
Yeah. And so it keeps growing. And because of this, the the protest, the general strike, which was unprecedented in Korea at that time, the police and the American military start getting worried. They send more police down here. They start arresting all the leaders of the organizers, putting them in jail, and then they're starting rumors of
abuse. I think we might have a little freeze problem.
Well, yeah. So last word I heard is abuse.
Yeah.
So.
Yes.
Okay.
I think we're having some issues here. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think we're good. So exactly, torture is what the people of Jeju start hearing, and the protest, the general strike starts to wane after the 20th because you can only arrest so many people, but this is where
and the idea is we need to quell the police officers, the mainlanders, the Americans. Is the whole purpose of this is we need to quell this. It needs to be stopped, and this is hence the arrest and stuff like this. We just need to put this to an end.
And so this is when Jeju starts getting the term as a rebellious province.
Right.
This is
yeah. Go ahead, Daryl.
There was a man who came, Korean. So, like, the head of the national peace came to the mainland. And he said that there's a rebellious, rebellious, lineage in Jeju, which is actually quite true. And I'm going to stamp it out. Is essentially what he tells Jeju.
Right.
And he's really brutal about that, and
the language and the accusations are it's a very strong, which will haunt Jeju people and Jeju families that were killed or take place in this event. This title we will talk about that later in the next episode with the apologists, but it will haunt them until now. Still. So this is a big deal.
And so this is March 1947. And so between March 1947 and April 3rd, 1948, which is the day the massacre gets its name from, things continue to build with arrests, with little skirmishes between police and the leftists on the island until, and at the same time, this is also when they're building up the general election. May 10, 1948 is the general election of Korea. And if you vote in this election for a president of South Korea, it feels like you're voting for the division of the country. Jeju is very much against that. So as we're getting closer to that date, on April 3rd, 1948, 350 badly armed guerrillas attacked 12 police boxes on Jeju in the middle of the night. They come down from the mountain at dawn, start lighting stuff on fire, and this is where the date comes from because of the original impetus to try to blame all of the deaths on the rebels.
Right. The actual rebels, if you will.
Yeah. See, because the left, some of the people who are on the left of this issue try to say that there weren't communist rebels on Jeju, but there were. It's just not.
Right.
Thousands and thousands, I think.
Not thousands and not a part of them. Hence, they're trying to make sure that this is like they're not actually. It's just us. So they're trying to make sure that they're not getting named this.
Yeah.
So now the rebels come down. They attack the police areas.
And on that day, and then they attack some of the Northwest Youth League too, which are these like gangs, North Korean refugee gangs that come down here. And it's pretty brutal. Like they do kidnappings, they do like it's not nice.
It's a big deal. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's very showy. It's very showy.
Very good point. Right. Yeah. It is quite showy. And but the response from the police is so hard that it wraps the entire island in it, right?
Yes.
Like after that, there's fighting between the two sides, and there's a negotiation that they try to get between the military and the rebels.
Peace talks, if you will. Yes.
Yeah, but that gets kiboshed.
Yep.
We'll get into that in another time. And then the May 10 general election comes up a month after this, and Jeju's the only one to successfully boycott it. And that kind of, for anybody in power's mind, solidifies for them that Jeju is not only a rebellious island, it's a communist island.
Yes. Yes.
And
And there we go.
yeah,
That word is just now this is it, you know?
yeah, and the person that they elect is Ri Sing Young, who's a staunch anti-communist, and so because Jeju originally didn't vote for him at all or for anybody, he sees it as a threat to the government. Yeah, his power, the just government of Korea too. And so that October, as the fighting continues, the South Korean military, which is now the South Korean military, because before that it was underneath the American. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. They put a prohibited access inland further than 3 miles from the coast, and say that anybody who is found in the mountainous regions of Jeju will be treated as a rioter and shot to death, because it was believed, well, it wasn't believed, it's where the rioters were hiding.
So to make that more clear for our listeners, you have to remember, of course, this was what year? Remind us, 1947,
1947 was the shooting incident. 1948 was the April 3rd.
So to just put that in easier terms, what they want here is that everyone must come down from the mountains, or, you know, even normal people that had higher elevation of living. Everyone needed to come down and to be in a ring around the Jeju coast, essentially. So this is what they've ordered and demanded.
Yeah, 3 miles though.
3 miles, right? Which is, you guys, you know, everyone needs to really think about that, you know, like that's crazy. So everything needs to be right here, and again, under control. Yeah, easily controlled. That's the goal. Easily controlled. So keep going from there.
And to be able to like to figure out, because they're not from here, they don't know who's who and what's what, and
they don't even know the towns and the villages or anything. It just this is how they have chosen to go about this. Everyone needs to be in sight and easily viewed, easily handled.
Yeah. And then so in November now, so that was done in October, where the ring, the consider it like a quarantine of most of the inland of Jeju.
Right.
Ri secretly declares martial law in November after, and what this does is hands over control over Jeju to the military.
And again, secretly, very important. So here we go.
People still debate this military court martial, like this, the order, like whether or not it was legal or not, or what have you. And I think it's generally thought of as illegal, but I'm not a scholar in that. So
and again, that's a whole nother thing. So here we are. Now we have martial law.
And the military executes a scorched earth policy on the quarantine area, which is they would go from village to village, burning it all down. So because they didn't know who was a rioter, who wasn't, and after they gave this quarantine, they just treated everybody as such.
Yes, everybody was a bad person now. So literally going from village to village, and you know, there's stories that are recounted of like one village being able to see the fire in the next town, and things like this, or hearing the screams and crazy stories about this. I mean, the fact that they were burning the animals, so the Jeju people were even eating the animals, because you remember this is a famine time. So when the animals were being burnt, there are stories of kids saying that was the first time they ever had cow, or, you know, things like this. So this was just a massive annihilation of villages.
It breaks my heart. Like, I've interviewed this one woman who she was a daughter. She was very young at the time, and she had 3 siblings, and most, like, her siblings died from lack of food, from malnourishment, because
it was just completely wiped. So now we're town to town is being burnt, and you know, they're just keep on going around.
But this is what, and it's brutal, because I mentioned it briefly before that they had the Northwest Youth League. So these Northwest Youth League, essentially consider them like a gang of angry North Koreans who were sent here to sick on people that they thought were communists. And these guys were like, had no rules and were brutal.
Really, really. When we say brutal, I mean horrible things were happening to everybody. The women were being raped. I mean, it was just think of the worst thing you can think of. This is what's going on right now, along with everything being burned. I mean, so there's no hiding at this point.
And
that leads us to more, right?
Yeah. So like this is when people think of the massacre, this is what they think of. They think of this period from the winter of 48
48.
to 49.
Right.
This is when the majority of the
deaths.
30,000 people are killed in this like scorched earth plan that they have, that
massive graves, mass graves. Why did I say mass? Yeah, mass graves being done, and dead bodies just being buried all over the island.
And rioters who were caught and tried, they were tried in mass trials at the airport.
Firings,
where the airport is
at the
now.
airport.
And a lot of them, those who were convicted to death, were killed right then and there, and others of them were sent to different prisons, Mukpo, and all over the place.
Well, and that, like, even that, I mean, this is how wild of a story this is, but even the airport, that is a massive a gravesite.
Yeah.
So even when that was built, I mean, there was no respect for these people and their families that had died. You can just see that, but now that there's an airport on this. So this is a big deal.
So after this massive purge, there are still rebels, but the numbers are at the max. I think it was 2,000 rebels. I think that's all it was.
Yes, something absolutely ludicrous of a low number.
Yeah, and as it continues, the massacre technically still continues, and there's like 100. There's like dwindling numbers, and the military continues to send these troops out into the hills to catch them and to kill them.
To the hiding people, to be clear. So at this point now, nobody has homes, or they have caught wind of what's happening, and they're leaving their villages before the troops come, and they're all now heading inland and to higher grounds.
Yeah, and so
and remember, there's a martial law saying no.
Yeah.
So here we go. Yeah.
So when the majority of the people are killed, the houses are gone, the villages are gone. Like Dongwon, like for a lot of people who are new to the island, they know about Shinhwa World, and to get to Shinhwa World from pretty much from where I am on the south side of the island, Jungmun, you have to go through this rotary called Dongwon. Dongwon used to be one of the villages that just doesn't exist anymore, and there's tons of them like that.
Yes.
And so after 49, when we get into 49, it's all this carnage is pretty much done, but yet the perimeter still exists.
Yes.
They start fortifying these towns, all the towns, with these big, huge stone fences.
Guard shacks.
Yeah. I've interviewed people who said like their father died building those things, which there's a symmetry, a disgusting symmetry of like Jeju people building tunnels for inter-Japanese, and then Jeju people building these walls to keep out like their brothers essentially, and people that their neighbors that they know that hid in the mountains. And so a lot of people got wrapped up in it just because they were young men. If you were young men, you were kind of assumed to be a rioter too.
Yes. Yeah. On the wrong side of things.
Yeah.
Right.
And
so now families have been chased away and are now living inland and up high. And so just remember that these walls are to keep them trapped out.
Yeah.
So if you chose to go run and do something, now you're essentially trapped by your own, unfortunately, by your own brothers, like you said, your own family in some instances.
And things are kind of not calming down, but I mean, there's a few of them, but also the Korean War starts in 1950.
Yes.
And focus is changing. And people and the Americans are actually here, and it's just small little groups that are going up into the mountain to find hunts.
Let's use the word hunts.
Ferrets.
Hunt.
Yeah. Yep. It's really terrible. Actually, some of them near the end of the war, they were trained in Hawaii, and they were brought here to go do that in preparation because the
terrain
is so similar, right? Mm-hmm. And the only reason why the massacre ends in 1954 is on September 21st, they removed the ban. And that is
and
essentially
the ban of the martial law, the perimeter ban. So now this is the secret one is now officially unsecretly lifted. Is that correct?
Martial law only lasted for like a month or two.
Right. Okay. Okay. Thanks for that clearing that up.
This was the ban on the
lands,
the quarantine of from 3 miles inward, right? Okay. And so that is officially the end of the massacre.
Okay.
But it doesn't
stop there per se.
Not really. Like when I interview people, I always ask them, like, when does the massacre end for you? Because it ends for everyone differently here, I've been finding out.
Yes.
You know, like it's because that's such an arbitrary date. For some people, it continues until today because they live with the black scar of being labeled being labeled a rebel, being labeled a communist.
I mean, and just to be clear about that, listeners, this is not it would be like coming out of prison nowadays where you couldn't get a job because your police record. So this is the same thing that is happening to people who had literally nothing to do with anything, but now their family name has a black mark on it. So they're unable to get jobs. They're unable to continue providing for the families. This is on top of the horrors that they witness and that they live through. You know, horrible to say. It would have been, for the people, oh God, I don't even want to say that out loud, but living through it was almost worse than having perished in the incident, because this was not just like Daryl said, snapping your fingers and being done. This was an ever going through their lifetime, through their children's lifetime.
I spoke to this one man who was on who left Jeju. A lot of people couldn't live here if they had criminal records associated
right, so they were
to the
just
massacre.
trying to go get jobs, and they had to basically just get out and go do a whole new thing.
And there on the mainland, they would try to do a business or have a job, and they would still be harassed by police.
Still.
So
it just wasn't ending, and that's very important. When we get to our next part 2 of the episode, when we're talking to the apologist, you'll really start to understand how important the apology was. But again, that's a whole nother episode. But what little impact? I mean, it's still ongoing to this day. So it's just such a big thing. Such a big thing.
Yeah, it affects. There's not one Jeju resident locally who has not been affected by
absolutely
it.
Not. Yeah,
right.
And absolutely not. And one of the things I think, and we touch base about this. What I find really interesting is Korea in itself just swept it under the rug. Mainlanders are not even educated to a degree of what happened in Jeju.
Good point.
This is not common knowledge. This is just knowledge in recent years where people that didn't have a direct impact now have more knowledge about it. But if you were to go to up to the mainland and just be like, oh, I was studying this, it's not ringing anybody's bells.
Yeah. Or like they have a very vague understanding of
which is crazy, because this is a huge thing that happened here on the islands.
And they come here to go vacation, and they have
here to go vacation and have no idea about the history, which is when the dark tour started. It caused a lot of drama because of the idea of it is the dark tour, but it was just such an important thing to happen in the moving on process and the recognition process. And I applaud the dark tour people, because when that really made a big difference in education.
Yeah. Well, so I guess that this is about part 1. From this point, next time we're going to talk about how the island kind of not moved away from it, but the next stages of what
and hit it
becomes.
And I think a proper term really hit it, because Jeju people also, I don't want it to seem like everyone was hiding this, because Jeju people didn't want to have this black mark on their name, so they were hiding it as well as the Korean government was hiding it. Everybody was just sweeping it under the rug.
Well, it was taboo here.
Absolutely. You just don't talk about it.
Yeah, because you don't want
can you imagine?
Well, some people,
your whole family was massacred, and you just can't even have a conversation about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I can't fathom that.
No.
Like, it's all the under the successive dictators that followed. It was just, and sometimes it was illegal. People would be arrested. People would be beaten by the secret police and all that kind of stuff. But we'll get into a bit more of that in part 2. We have already gone over our time.
We were like, Daryl and I were like, let's just keep this short and sweet. But it's just so hard to. But I'll tell you what, listeners, what we are going to do is we have extended our website. So when you go to our website, of course, you can find links to our Instagram, our Facebook. You can find links to all of the podcasts and all the ways you listen, Google, Spotify, all that stuff. But what we've also are doing right now is we're updating our website to include what we think are relevant links. So Daryl and I will make the effort. We're trying to get that up and running, but under this podcast, which will be episode number what, Daryl?
This will be 21, I believe.
Okay, I'm so glad you have a memory for numbers because I certainly don't. So what we will try to do is, because we did keep this brief, but we will just try to throw up a couple links to books or a couple articles that either I really liked or that Daryl thought was very interesting. And then if you choose to, you can try to start to get a bigger grasp, because we did really skip a lot of things. I mean,
a whole lot, yeah.
You could talk about this forever and still just not know. So we're just going to throw up a few things up there so that if you want to kind of educate yourself a little bit more, we will provide some ways to do that, to get you started on that journey.
And if you have like thoughts or questions or comments, please feel free to email us them at meyouandjeju@gmail.com, or probably better is just contact us at our Instagram page.
Instagram's great. We love interacting with our listeners. Just remember though, we really want to stress this. We know that we skipped a lot. We know that was the point of this. So no need to say, don't forget this. We know. We just wanted for, I just feel like it just isn't talked about, and especially with foreigners that live here. I think we choose to live on this amazing island, and we live really nice lives here. But it's really important, which is why I think I started doing this podcast in the first place. Was it's really important to know the history of the place that you have chosen to call your home. And Daryl and I feel really strongly about this. So hence this episode of brief education, primer, as Daryl calls it.
I like or a handbook. Yeah.
No, not even a handbook, dude. Like you said earlier, a pamphlet of basic facts. So, but we'll be seeing you. We'll be next time in about a week from after this release. We'll be releasing, and I'm really excited about that podcast. Part 2. We'll be talking about the apology and what impact that had, and really what an apologist is, because I didn't know that before doing that interview.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk to you then.
Okay. See you soon.